Hello and welcome to International Economics, Economics 210. In this class, we have a hybrid class, and that means there's a lot of activity done online. There's also a lot of activity done in the classroom. So we'll be meeting from 7 in the evening until 9 in the evening every Monday beginning June 1st. We'll be in room 205 in Building C on the Portsmouth campus of TCC. So I thought I would give you a brief overview of how the class is structured. Here are the activities that you'll have to do during the class. There's a midterm exam worth 200 points, a final exam worth 200 points, Blackboard homework about 1 per learning unit, and that means about 8 learning units other than the midterm, and collectively then those will each be worth a little more than 100 points. Blogs, about 8 of those, 1 for each learning unit, and again, worth a little more than 100 points each. These blogs will not be particularly short. Don't be looking at blogging where you say yes, no, amen, this type of thing. I'll really be asking you to give some thought to an international topic and write a few paragraphs on it. And then we'll have a project. And the theme of the project is, I want you to imagine you were starting a business and do a little research and think about what country you should locate your business in. Stay tuned, there'll be more on the project later, but the project is also worth 200 points. A perfect score in the class then is 1,000. 900 to 1,000 points is an A. 800 to 899 points is a B. 700 to 799 points is a C. 600 to 699 points is a D, and if you get less than 600 points, unfortunately you fail the class. Here are the primary topics that we address in the class. We'll begin now with the activity you're working on, indeed the end of this video, talking about the international economy and globalization. We'll also have a bit of class discussion on it that ends next week. We'll have some discussion of comparative advantage and some work to do on that. We'll have something or a variety of activities to deal with tariffs and barriers. We'll think a lot about trade policies, and indeed, there's a relationship between trade policies and tariffs and barriers. We'll talk about the movement of capital and labor. Sometimes this is called the movement of the factors of production. We'll think in some detail about exchange rates. We'll consider macroeconomic policy at the government level, and we'll close the semester by thinking a bit about international banking. One of the things I think students in any international economics class taught on a college campus would be interested in is, what is that college doing to be international? And here's some things we're doing, and indeed some of the things that your professor's doing. I lead an international exchange to Randers, Denmark. This year we'll be taking 9 students. Some of them in international business, some in social science, and some in health. So if you're motivated to go to Denmark, unfortunately for this year it's a little too late, but stay in touch with me and think about how you could go on the trip next year. We'll be gone for roughly 2 weeks, right at the beginning of the fall term. So because we deal with Tradium College, this will be my second trip over, I wanted to compare Denmark's GDP per capita with the US GDP per capita. So this would be one measure of average income per person. Here you would take a look at a country's total GDP divided by the number of people, and this is one way you could come up with an average. So indeed, Denmark has an average GDP or an average income of 59,800 per person, and in the US we have an average income of 53,042 per person. This is the most recent data I could find in 2013. So if you're not at 53,000, think about it. Is what you're preparing for in college going to get you closer to $53,000? Realize this means half the Americans live better, half live worse. But truthfully, because we're using GDP per capita, we're not even talking about the middle American. In other words, a millionaire's salary weighs very heavily on the salary number or on the GDP number, and not on the number of recipients. On the other hand, a homeless person might have no GDP, not contribute at all to the GDP, but still count as one of the people per capita. Before we take a look at anything else, let me show you where Randers, Denmark is so you can think about our exchange there. Here it is coming up on the map. You can see it right there. Denmark is considered one of the Scandinavian countries. The city we go to, Randers, Denmark, is about here toward the north. And Copenhagen, the most prominent city in Denmark, is right here and nearly shares a border with Sweden. Indeed, we take a couple of days and spend a little time in Copenhagen when we're there. Well, I also thought you might have some interest in what I've been doing internationally other than visiting Denmark. And here's some other things I've done in the recent past. In the year 2010, I went with 17 members of the faculty and staff to China, and we toured 4 cities there. Notice that China's GDP is 6,807 per person as of 2013. So this means while you hear stories about how China's catching us, to ever get to a point where the average Chinese person has more money than the average American, a great deal has to change. Indeed, even the total income or total GDP of the United States is twice the size of China's, despite China having 4 times the number of people that we have in the United States. In 2009, I visited Romania and I delivered a paper there dealing with ways to expand the economy. I participated in that at the University of Bucharest, which is the capital city. GDP in Romania is about the lowest in Europe at 9,500. Notice, still more than China, but far less than Denmark. And then maybe brings us to an interesting question as we get ready to consider the last country that I've been to recently, which is Canada. And the question here is Canada really international? Well, yes, it really is. It has a different government system. It does a number of things differently. So we certainly always consider Canada an international destination. So here what you see is that in 2012, Canada's GDP is $51,950, which means Canada is just a little bit smaller in terms of income per person than the US. Notice then the average Canadian lives much better than the average Chinese person or the average Romanian. Well, let's take another minute. I know I hear horror stories about how bad Americans are with geography, and think about where these 2 countries are. All right, here's a political map of Europe. Notice earlier I mentioned Denmark. Denmark in all of Europe is up here. Romania is here, sort of southern Europe. Indeed, you think of Romania as being a country that was home to vampires and Vlad the Tepes, Dracula's castles there. But indeed, I found the Romanians to have a lot more in common with the Greeks than I did with, let's say, Germans. Now, this big map is just designed to show you that we spent a lot of time here on the the east coast of China. And then here would be the west coast of the United States. Here's Norfolk, where we actually flew out of. Just a couple of last notes. It was, again, designed to be a short video. Let's make this a fun class. Be sure to bring your questions. Share your stories about any places you've been that are international. And consider how countries compete for outsourcing. That's one of the things we're going to take on in your class project. Well, I hope you enjoy the class. Let me know if you have any questions.